Our next speaker is Guinness Garrido of the Graduate School of Design of Harvard University, who will speak on the gravity-defying nature of the new landscape infrastructure.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Regina, for inviting me. And thank you for all of you. I was born very, very close to Toledo. So this is the link that I have with Vitebsk. I have never been in Vitebsk. I would like to travel. So I had to travel. Well, for me, it's really an honor to be here. Well, I'm Spanish, so I'm hosted this year in the Harvard Graduate School of Design, but I have another relation with Russia through the Spanish School of Architecture. Well, and also I'm an architect, so I don't know many things about artists because I understand that architecture, it could be, or many people consider that it's an artist's work, but for me, the architecture is something that you have to give to the people. So, and this is a completely different thing that happens with the artists that are mainly building himself. So I'm going to explain in this presentation a question that probably is not easy to understand. Is why Lazar Khidekel draw these floating cities? In which things they were thinking? Because most of us could think that it's really a crazy thing, but I'm completely convinced that there now this project has a lot of sense. Well, between the 1921 and the 1930, the Russian architect Lazar Khidekel drew a formidable array of gravity-defying aerial cities floating over the ground and generating an unprecedented landscape in which new Soviet man could find a new revolutionary way of living. These urban visions were not utopian, dreams about impossible worlds. Khidekel, like many other Soviet architects and artists, was completely convinced that this vision would come true in a near future, that they had started to build then after the triumph of the Bolsheviks revolution in the 1917. The communist revolution dreamed of a new man who could fit into a new social structure, and going one step further, it also imagined the formulation of a physics in which the weight and the gravitational character of the world could be abolished. Thus, the weight would become a characteristic of the past. If for architects, gravity was something that you have to apply with, is a condition without which their works would lack of meaning, for the Soviet avant-garde, the challenge posed by gravity would be essential to architecture. Technique had shown that this challenge was possible. For that, huge steel constructions, skyscrapers, bridges of great dimension, railway stations, and towers like the Savolotka Tower in Moscow showed that engineers were in a position to overcome gravity. They have this group of artists in the early 20s in Russia. They have the great confidence of the technique and its ability to transform the world, and had seen how in just a few years the aircraft had revolutionized transport, war, and travel with the construction of increasingly heavy, safe, and fast aircrafts. The aircraft was not only a paradigm of the technique, which avant-garde longed for, but also the closest expression of the only thing which the new man, the new Soviet man, needed in order to move to another nature, to the ability to fly. This is the cover of one of the most important essays written by Moises Gisburg, Epoch and Style, in which there in the front page there is the triplano caprone, this marvelous aircraft. So they was fascinated by the idea of flying, and they was completely convinced that they could fly in a very, very close future. But Khidekel, in these dreamings, was not alone. In the early decades of the 20th century, while aviation technology was being developed, many artists, architects, and writers, and not just Russians, took those early mechanicist flight to the extreme and dreamed about the interplanetary travel, fabulous flying machines that would allow us to colonize the solar system, extremely light architecture, and entire floating worlds. Tolstoy, Alexis Tolstoy, the author of the novel Aelita, described the journey from Petrograd to Mars of two communist heroes, and they came out from Petrograd in August of 1921 and come back in June of 1925, landing in Michigan. I don't know why, but it's the truth. Well, many other artists were thinking in these flying worlds, like, for instance, the German artist Havlik, who drew between 1907 and 1914 a series of floating cities, such as the space colony that we can see on the screen. And in 1908, they create a marvelous series of new society worlds that he thought that could live in these floating worlds or machines. I don't know how we could call. Bruno Taut also included in the Alpine Architecture published in 1920 his astral building, a floating architectural structure with which Bruno Taut proposed to completely abandon the Earth. Or Frederick Kistler, a few years later, in 1925, designed the city in the space that it was presented in Paris in the exposition of the art decoratives. It's like a vision of a floating, light, and mechanized city. And also Russians, like in 1927, Viktor Kalmykov designed a city that he called Saturn, consisting of a ring placed around the Earth's equator, and that occasionally thought hovering could be raised over the ocean and the land and could remain floating in orbit. And also Georgy Krutikov, 1 year later, in 1928, as his final degree project at the School of Hutemas, Georgy Krutikov delivered the Flying City, a mechanized flying city that created an ideal settlement for the new Soviet man to live in. And also Lissitsky, that we just saw that it was working together with Khidekel in Vitebsk. In 1925, proposed this Wolkenbügel, or cloud iron, that is a fantastic project that he delivered with the Swiss engineer, like an urban project that we can see here. And this is here in this map of Moscow, in which he proposed to build these pieces in the junctions of the main radial streets and the first ring. So thinking in something that is more than a building and trying to invent a new typology of a new building that he called horizontal skyscraper, thinking that it was more efficient than the vertical skyscraper that he built in Chicago or in New York. But not only architects and artists was thinking in these floating cities. Also artists like Lissitsky draw this dynamic city. So many of these artists was thinking in the same things in this world that it will be built. They thought it will be built in a very, very close time, very, very fast. But all these ideas came also from other thoughts that it was planned or it was in Europe those years. Well, this is another cosmic composition by Alexander Rodchenko, or this blue cosmos that we can see in the screen by Kazimir Malevich. So all of them was thinking in more or less the same thing, trying to build a new language, a new language that could build a new world that is mostly floating in the air, and some of them could go out from the Earth and occupy completely the solar system of the universe. Well, see, Lissitsky, also Malevich, that we hear from Maria all these theories about the cosmos. But I said that many of these ideas came from two different things. First, about the theories from the Soviet disurbanists, so people who was thinking in how to transform the territory and the land of Russia in a completely different thing, trying to understand that is something that could occupy it and could control completely by the industry, but maintaining at the same time the rural areas and maintaining the landscape as they found when they win the revolution. This is drawings from these theories of extending the network of the city from by Vitebsk. Here we can see another drawing that it's talking about the same thing. This is the process in which the cities could spread completely in a network that in the future could occupy completely the territory, the land, trying to maintain the land and at the same time transform the rural areas in a modern way of living in terms of the Soviet state. But also these theories was completely related with something that we could see here in the US through the Howard City Garden or Garden City, that it was written in England but has an enormous impact in the territory of the US. But the Soviet architects and the Soviet urbanism was trying to understand and trying to apply in a different way. And the other thing that was in many cases in these architects, in the mind of this architect, was the relation with the weight, with the relation with the possibility of flying. And we can see this example from a photograph by Alexander Rodchenko. So many of them was thinking that architecture are losing the contact with the ground in some way, and some of them was thinking that the architecture architecture is more related to something that could fly in a completely real term, but many of them was trying to express this lightness in a extreme way, that because they thought that this lightness was related to the modernity and it was related to the Soviet way of thinking. And many, of course, many compositions like this by Malevich is called aircraft flying. So it was also relating to something that is the technique of the aircrafts that they was completely fascinated, but also the immateriality of this, or the possible immateriality of the architecture that we can he express in these floating pieces over the paper. But there was another relations. As probably you know, the Russian physicist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky published in 1903 his major work, The Exploration of Cosmic Space by Means of Reaction Devices, in which he laid the foundations for the physics of modern astronomy, and for the first time discussed the possibility of traveling into space using the propulsion of jet engines. Well, we can see here Tsiolkovsky in Kaluga in 1924. And this is the front cover of this book. So Tsiolkovsky published hundreds of articles on space travel, which are full of extraordinary drawings of rockets and their engines and the equipment necessary to control them, and established the rocket mass radius and the fundamental formula for space travel, and as a result developed the segmented rocket system that was later adopted universally by the aerospace industry for launching rockets into the space. Tsiolkovsky had an elementary schooling and taught himself mathematics and physics, spending long hours reading in libraries. It was from this that he drew the idea that it was possible to go into the space, and he was able to do the mathematical calculation on which all subsequent aerospace experiments have been based. But we can see some of these drawings. But Tsiolkovsky did not draw his idea only from his formidable mathematical intuition. In Moscow, he had come into contact with the Orthodox Christian philosopher Nikolai Fyodorov, who in 1906 had published Philosophy of the Common Task, on which Cosmism was founded. This movement was strongly influenced by the cosmic view of the world present in the Russian culture, and this is clearly evident from many of their traditions, as well as the literature, philosophy, and science. Cosmism attributed moral values to science and technology as forces to be used by humanity to produce an artificial world that avoids the gravity and the impositions by the nature, and eventually modeling an immortal man. This artificial construction would dominate nature, first controlling the weather, then the movement of the planets and the solar system, and eventually the entire universe, which according to Cosmism would end up being controlled and occupied by humans. So man would be called upon the managed nature, and thus the cosmos would be continuous and finished, a construction completed by man, creating an interdependent unit with it. So Tsiolkovsky fully accepted the cosmos and actively participated in its intellectual development with the publication in 1928 of The Will of the Universe, we are seeing the front pages, The Unknown Intelligent. A few years later, between 1914 and 1915, the poet Velimir Klevnikov wrote the SI Houses and Us, in which he proposed a set of new types of crystalline, light, and transportable homes that could be linked together in a mesh structure that would provide the necessary services. Weightlessness and transparency was the goal, and he imagined cities that would float freely in space. We can see some of these sketches. Imagine cities that would float freely in space, inhabited by flying individuals living in flying housings. These visions were in harmony with Fedorov's ideas of a fully inhabited universe. So, well, as you just know, in the fall of 1918, Khidekel began his studies at the Vitebsk School of Art, which Marc Chagall began manage at the end of the year. Khidekel, who was then 14 years old, spent a few months with Suprematism, drawing watercolors, nudes, and still lifes. But in the spring of 1919, he became a pupil of Chagall, and in the fall, he joined the studio run by Lissitsky. The influence of Lissitsky was extremely strong because Lissitsky was trained as an architect. And he understand and he translate or transfer this experiment that it was mainly artists and fine arts pieces in something that it was architecture, like we can see in this drawing from the Lenin Tribune. So very, very easily, Lissitsky was thinking in something that could build in some way, and for that he transmit to Khidekel and also the other students the skills of the axonometric and the skills also of the some kind of elementary construction principles. We can see here the technical drawings that he draw with Emil Roth, the Swiss engineer, about the Wolkenbügel, the iron cloth, or the cloth iron, in which you can find that these drawings are more related to architecture because he was thinking in something that could be changed from the paper to the architecture, trying to build something completely new. And this is very important for Khidekel because Khidekel was also trained as an architect later, and for that he has in mind the principle that all this exercise that he was doing in Vitebsk with Khidekel could move to architecture in some way. And mostly of this exercise that he was, and we can see in the exhibition, are for me like a proto-architectures, because for me all this, and I think also for Khidekel, all these drawings are like a promise of new worlds in terms of architecture. All these drawings could, for me, is like a plant of a skyscraper that we can see from Rengolas perhaps now. So some of them could identify like pieces or plants or sections or drawings that belongs to the field of the architecture. Like this, called Yellow Cross, that we can understand that is a square in which something happens with more activity, with more interactions between people or something else. Or, of course, this also cosmic, in some way, cosmic structures that also it was in mind through, because he wasn't related to the cosmins that was related to Klevnikov, that it was related to Malevich. So all of these ideas of floating worlds, of rockets, of new worlds that could be built in a near future, what also in the mind of Khidekel. Like this suprematist composition that also could understand like a like a very, very elementary work of architecture, or this that is extremely, well, in that case, it's a collage that could also could also find or could also understand like an architectural work. So through Lissitsky, I think two things happens that is very, very important that move the drawings that Khidekel was preparing and doing in Vitebsk to the floating cities. First, he learned the skill of the axonometric view, so he understands that it's possible to draw and express things that has a tridimensional sense. And the other thing, all these drawings, not in that case because this is more obvious, that is a representation of a project of architecture. Some of them was not so abstract because the work of Malevich was completely abstract, and he was thinking was seeking for a language completely abstract and universal. But these drawings are a representation of something, as a representation in most of the cases of a future architecture. So if I talk about I have to talk about these floating cities. What is really, really exceptional in the work of Khidekel is the relation with the land, the relation with the landscape. So he understands that this floating city, that it was, of course, related to the aircraft and the idea of something extremely light, was superimposed to the landscape, trying to protect the landscape and protect the rural areas, just double the city or double the world in a well, I think thinking that this is something that could spread completely around the planet. We can see here, for instance, the layers in which he thought this floating city could create. And the other thing that is completely exceptional is the presence of the nature, the trees, the rivers, the lakes, the topography that is extremely important, in which he was and he played and he established relations between this land, this territory that exists, is not abstract, it's something completely real, and the floating cities. So these floating cities is not something that could express completely homogeneous in a homogeneous way over the Earth. Is something that has some kind of interaction with the planet, with the Earth, and this is extremely modern. We can see here more precise drawings, but the same, something that happens in relation with the topography, with the nature, with the trees. Or this elevated garden cities that also has relation with the green structures of the world and of the city. And finally, this I think is these green and blue atmospheres that are, for me, extremely amazing because the relation between the nature and the relation with the existing land. Well, we can see here another one in which we can understand that happens something with the water. Here, the same. And I would like to finish saying that these visions was completely forbidden during 40 years, 50 years, or many years. And in the 70s and in the 60s, many other architects used it for producing a new revolutionary projects, like here we can see the Jonah Friedman or the Constant project making the 60s and the 70s, mainly in the 60s, or from Sutle, Fiedel, or Bothwell sections and floating worlds that was drawing in the 60s and the 70s. This is this is because this the work of Khidekel is so important because along the century, many other architects has in mind the same ideas, and now many architects are drawing, and some of them are trying to build this kind of visions that Khidekel had 70 years ago. Thank you.